You ever meet a woman who gave away everything she ever had and never once asked for anything back? That's Mary. She was the kind of mother who stayed up past midnight sewing buttons back on her daughter's school uniform when everyone else was sleeping. The kind of woman who sold her wedding ring to cover tuition without a second thought. The kind of soul who measured love not by what she said, but by what she gave. And for years, she told herself that one day her daughter would see it. One day her sacrifices would shine like hidden jewels, finally pulled into the light. But here's the truth that hurts most. Sometimes the people you love the deepest, the ones you bleed for, are the very same people who forget you even existed. This isn't just a family drama. It's the beginning of a revenge story told in silence, stitched with every thread of sacrifice Mary ever made. Mary Tran was 68 years old, and she lived in a modest single-story house at the edge of town, the kind of place with creaky wooden floors and lace curtains that never seemed to hang straight. On paper, her life was plain. She was a widow, a retired cashier from a discount grocery, and she lived alone now that her daughter had long since moved into the city. But anyone who stepped into her kitchen would feel the life Mary had poured into others. The sewing machine sitting by the window, the spice rack crowded with jars labeled in faded ink, the drawer stuffed with old report cards and birthday cards her daughter once made in grade school. Every inch of that house told the story of a woman who gave far more than she ever kept. She'd grown up in a family where love was something you proved, not something you said. Mary carried that belief into motherhood. When her daughter, Linda, came into the world 32 years ago, Mary swore she would never let the girl feel the hunger and uncertainty she herself had known. She worked double shifts at the grocery, came home sore and exhausted, and still sat up late into the night hemming dresses, ironing shirts, baking muffins for bake sales. Linda never had to worry about standing out in class. Every costume for every play was hand-stitched by Mary. Every science fair project had her quiet fingerprints pressed into it. There was one winter, Linda was only 9, and the family was behind on heating bills. Mary pawned her gold wedding ring, the last piece of jewelry her late husband had given her, just to keep the lights on and make sure Linda had a Christmas tree lit up in the corner of the living room. The girl never knew. She just woke up to hot chocolate, gifts wrapped in colorful paper, and a warm home that smelled like pine. For Mary, that was enough. She didn't need applause. She thought love would always be its own reward. In her small community, neighbors knew her as the lady with the sewing hands. When someone ripped a sleeve or tore a hem, Mary was the one they called. She never charged much, sometimes nothing at all. She believed kindness came back around, and if it didn't, that was fine too. To her, the point wasn't to keep score. The point was to know she had done right by someone. That was her compass. Linda was her sun. Everything Mary did was in orbit around her daughter's happiness. She gave up chances to travel with friends, refused invitations to senior clubs because there was always something Linda needed: a ride, a check, a babysitter, a meal cooked just in case. Even as Linda grew older, Mary never stopped giving. She remembered every birthday, every anniversary, even work milestones, marking them with thoughtful little notes or a fresh-baked pie. When Linda went off to college, Mary worked overtime to cover what scholarships didn't. She mailed care packages stuffed with homemade cookies and tiny bottles of cold medicine, tucking handwritten notes between the folds of sweaters. She never signed them, "Love, Mom." She signed them with just her name, Mary, because she thought the actions spoke louder than words. And for a while, Linda seemed grateful. She called, she said thank you, she even brought friends home to show off, "My mom who can fix anything." Those were Mary's golden years, or so she thought. But here's the thing about sacrifice. When it's constant, it can become invisible. The more Mary gave, the more natural it seemed to Linda that her mother would always be there, always patching, always filling the gaps. That was the beginning of the forgetting. Mary didn't see it at first. She thought she was doing what mothers are meant to do, be the steady ground beneath their children's feet. She told herself that one day, when Linda was older, when the world had been hard to her, she'd look back and understand. She'd see her mother not as background, but as the foundation. And Mary held onto that belief like a lifeline. Even as she aged, even as her body grew stiff and her hands shook after too many years of stitching seams, she kept saving scraps of fabric, hoping someday to sew a dress for Linda's wedding. Not for herself, not to be admired, but to give her daughter one more piece of her heart made visible. Mary's story, at this point, looks ordinary, almost sweet in its simplicity. A mother's love, a daughter's bright future. But if you look closer, if you listen between the lines, you'll hear the silence forming, the weight of unspoken gratitude that never comes, the dangerous seed of neglect beginning to sprout. And that seed, though small, will grow into something that changes everything. For now, Mary is still the woman who believes love will circle back, who believes her sacrifices are seen even if unspoken. She folds laundry with care. She saves pennies in a jar marked Linda's wedding. She hums lullabies while hemming the edge of a skirt. She is steady, devoted, certain. She doesn't yet know that her faith will be tested in a way that will tear the very fabric of her life. She doesn't yet know that the daughter she gave everything to will one day be the very person who rips her apart. But you and I know. And that's why this beginning matters, because every silent sacrifice is setting the stage. Every quiet act of love is laying the foundation for heartbreak. This is how a gentle woman's story begins, and this is how a storm brews in the calm. Spring made the town look new. Linda called Mary on a Saturday morning, breathless and bright. "Mom, it's official. St. Augustine is ours, and I hired a content team." The word content hung in the kitchen like a neon sign. Mary smiled anyway. She pictured pews of cousins, a hymn, her daughter radiant for reasons that had nothing to do with cameras, and herself near the front, where mothers usually sit. The first sign was small, a hairline crack in glass. Linda sent a planning link with tabs labeled mood, palette, and shot list. Mary clicked and saw tidy boxes. Golden hour vows, first look staircase, tears with dad. There was no mom. She told herself they'd add one later. She typed, "What colors should I wear?" and waited. No reply came that day or the next. Days slid into a new rhythm. Linda texted more than she called, and the texts read like invoices. Need RSVP by Friday. Please store favors 1 week. Also avoid prints. Brand guidelines are neutral tones only. She pulled an oatmeal cardigan and a cream blouse from her closet and imagined herself blending into the wall. It would be fine. Plenty of mothers prefer the background. She could be the quiet kind if that kept the peace. At a pastry tasting, everything was white and echoing. Hannah, the content manager, arrived late with a tablet and a confident smile. "We're curating a cohesive story," she said, swiping through slides. "Think editorial, refined, legacy brand." She handed Mary a mood board of strangers in sleek silk. Palette is bone, oyster, vapor. No reds, no prints, no shiny accessories. Mary nodded, thumb grazing the paper. She knew how to be quiet. She didn't know she'd be edited. On the family group chat, Family Wedding Core, Mary posted a photo of vintage glass vases she'd found at a thrift store, thinking they could line the aisle like little lanterns. The typing dots winked, vanished, returned. Linda wrote, "So cute, but not our aesthetic. Also, Mom, let's keep ideas on the main board so we don't clutter the thread." Mary apologized to a line of blue bubbles and felt like a guest who had knocked on the wrong door. That night, she stared at the ceiling and rehearsed saying less. A schedule arrived labeled Content Day, with call times, a shot list, and a surprise gratitude moment with Dad. Mary read it twice, as if the letters might rearrange and invite her in. She texted, "If you'd like, I can embroider a handkerchief with your initials." Hours later, a new note appeared. "Vendor will provide monogrammed hankies. Thank you." The thank you felt like a door closing. Here's where I ask you, heart to heart, if you were in Mary's place, invited to the day but gently written out of the story, what would you do? Would you speak or would you save your words? Share it below. Someone reading might need your courage tonight. On Sunday, Mary brought lemon bars to church. Father Nolan remembered Linda as the girl who sang too loud in the Christmas pageant and asked if Mary needed anything for the big day. She almost requested a small corner of the hall to set up her sewing machine the week before, just to hem stray threads and be useful. Instead, she said, "We're all set, Father," and pressed another lemon bar into his hand. Linda's calls shortened. Airplane noise bled through as Linda said, "We're shooting invites tomorrow. Oh, and no corsages. They read dated." Mary looked at the silk ribbon she'd bought in a moment of joy and slipped it back into the drawer. When she asked where she should sit at the rehearsal dinner, Linda answered, "We'll figure it out. We're limiting the head table for symmetry." At the bridal salon, Mary held her breath while Linda turned in a dress that cost more than Mary had earned in months. The gown was architectural, the fabric refusing to wrinkle. "What do you think?" Linda asked, watching Hannah's tablet rather than her mother's face. "You look like light," Mary said, because it was true. Hannah murmured about exposure and veils. Mary ended up holding a pair of shoes and a veil box. If a heart can shift from warm to unsure, Mary felt the tilt as a series of paper cuts. Linda introduced her as, "This is Mary. She's my mom," with the same tone you'd use for a +1. Hannah's rehearsal map drew a neat rectangle around the bridal party that omitted Mary by design. Linda's laughter for camera sounded brighter than the one Mary knew from the kitchen table. None of it was cruel. All of it was clear. That evening, she pulled her sewing machine to the window and threaded a needle. She stitched an invisible hem along a napkin edge. The hum steadied her hands. She didn't know what she was mending, cloth or hope or both. She only knew that making something whole in her lap kept her voice even when the phone buzzed with another schedule she wasn't in. Love is not a ledger, she reminded herself, and yet ledgers exist so things don't disappear between transactions. She exhaled, folded the napkin, and promised herself she would ask again tomorrow, even if nobody answered back. Outside, a siren wailed and faded, leaving the house quiet enough to hear her heart at work. The morning of the church rehearsal was cool and bright, the kind of day Mary once prayed for when she imagined her daughter's wedding. She had spent hours preparing herself, pressing her one good dress until every crease disappeared. It wasn't new, but it was hers. The same dress she had worn on the day Linda graduated from college, a dress Mary had stitched by hand from scraps she'd saved over the years. It was a patchwork of memories, quiet proof of everything she had poured into her daughter's life. She stood outside St. Augustine, smoothing the hem with nervous palms. Bells rang overhead, soft and steady, and for a moment she let herself believe this would be the day she finally stepped into the story as the proud mother, the woman who raised the bride. She imagined Linda catching sight of her, maybe even whispering, "That's my mom," with a hint of pride. Instead, what came was a sharp voice slicing through the air. "Mom, what are you wearing?" Linda stood on the steps, framed by the camera crew. A microphone pack clipped to her back, lights reflecting in her eyes. She looked less like a bride-to-be and more like an actress in a commercial. Mary blinked, confused. "It's the dress I made. You loved it once. Remember your graduation?" She tried to smile. Linda's jaw tightened. She glanced at Hannah, the content manager, then back at her mother. "This doesn't work. It throws off the palette. We're filming and you're ruining the shot." Before Mary could answer, Linda reached forward and tugged at the fabric, hard. The sound of tearing ripped through the quiet morning. The seam gave way, unraveling down the side. Gasps from the crew, the quick shuffle of feet as cameras turned to catch what they thought was drama worth posting. Mary froze. She felt the air leave her chest. Her heart dropped straight to the ground. She wasn't just standing in a torn dress. She was standing in the wreckage of every unspoken thank you she had waited a lifetime to hear. "I can't have this," Linda hissed under her breath, though the mic carried every syllable. "I've worked too hard for this wedding to look cheap." Mary's lips trembled. Cheap. The word lodged like glass in her throat. The dress she had stitched with shaking hands, the fabric she had chosen piece by piece, was nothing more than a liability to her daughter. Someone from the crew stepped forward, whispering, "We'll cut this in post. Maybe spin it as a light moment?" But nothing about it was light. Mary clutched the torn edge, not to fix it, but to keep herself from shaking apart. She thought about every night she had sewn buttons back on Linda's clothes, so she'd never be embarrassed at school. She thought about the ring she pawned, so Linda could have new shoes and hot meals. She thought about how she'd spent decades invisible, and now here she was, visible at last only as a mistake to be erased. Neighbors passing by slowed down, their eyes darting between mother and daughter. One of them whispered, "Isn't that her mom?" The shame pressed heavier than the dress itself. Linda turned back to the cameras, her voice suddenly bright, rehearsed. "Let's reset. Everyone back in place. We'll shoot again in 5. She didn't look at Mary as she spoke. She didn't even pause to ask if her mother was all right. Mary wanted to scream, to demand recognition, to cry out, "I gave you everything. I'm not a mistake." But her throat locked, and all that came out was silence. She held the torn fabric close and stepped aside, out of the frame, out of the story. Her body moved, but her heart stayed shattered on those church steps. Inside, laughter returned, lights flickered back on, and the rehearsal rolled forward as if nothing had happened. Mary sat on a wooden bench under the shadow of the church wall, staring at her hands. They were the same hands that had cradled Linda as a newborn, that had packed lunches, wiped tears, signed permission slips. Now they just looked old, trembling, empty. She thought, maybe this is what it feels like to be erased while still alive. The bells rang again, but they no longer sounded like celebration. They tolled like a warning, echoing in her bones. Mary pressed her palms against her knees, grounding herself. She had always believed love would circle back, that no sacrifice vanished forever. But here she was, torn open, dismissed in front of strangers and neighbors alike. She wasn't just excluded, she was denied, her very presence rewritten as a flaw in her daughter's perfect narrative. It was in that moment she realized the deepest cruelty is not in being forgotten. It is in being remembered only as something to be hidden. Mary rose slowly, the torn dress dragging behind her like a broken wing. She walked to the far side of the courtyard, out of the camera's reach. Nobody stopped her. Nobody noticed. But you and I know what this moment means. This is the cut that will not heal quietly. This is the scene where a mother's silence begins to transform into something else. Not rage, not vengeance shouted aloud, but the quiet, steady stitching of dignity torn apart. The cruel denial had been spoken. The wound was fresh. And the story, the one her daughter never meant to tell, was only just beginning. The rehearsal ended, but the sting of that torn dress followed Mary like a shadow. She kept her hands folded tight in her lap, as if holding them still could keep her whole. She told herself to breathe, to keep calm, to remember she was still the mother of the bride. Yet every breath felt thinner than the last. The next evening, there was a dinner at the country club downtown hosted by Ethan's parents. Round tables dressed in ivory linens stretched across the hall, silverware gleaming under chandeliers. The whole night was supposed to feel elegant, polished, perfect, at least on camera. Hannah and her team circled the room like directors of a stage play, rearranging guests, fluffing napkins, fixing hair before the cameras rolled. Mary arrived early, her heart pounding in her chest. She had sewn a fresh blouse to pair with a long black skirt, plain but pressed clean. She stood at the doorway, waiting for someone to guide her in, but no one noticed. She finally found her name card. Not near the head table, not even near Linda, but tucked in the back corner by the service door. She smiled faintly, as though the placement didn't sting, and sat down quietly. When Linda entered, all eyes turned toward her. The cameras clicked, the room hushed with admiration. "Our radiant bride," Hannah whispered loud enough for the mics to catch. Mary's heart swelled despite herself. Her daughter did look beautiful. She clapped softly from the back table, unnoticed in the swirl of praise. Dinner began, plates arriving in rhythm. But when the server reached Mary's table, he hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, glancing at his list. "We're short one entree." He set down a small salad in front of her. "We'll find something from the kitchen." By the time a plate arrived, most guests were on dessert. Mary ate slowly, pretending she wasn't hungry. Then came the speeches. Ethan's father raised a glass, thanking friends, partners, and family who had helped make this wedding possible. He mentioned vendors, planners, even a distant cousin who lent linens. But Mary's name was nowhere in the list. She waited, breath held, heart tightening with each omission. When he finished, everyone clapped. Mary pressed her hands together to hide the tremor. Later, Hannah walked up with a clipboard. "Mary, could you just scoot over a bit? You're in the background of the father of the bride shot and it doesn't quite frame well." She motioned toward the camera angle. Mary nodded, sliding her chair back against the wall. She watched through the blur of tears as Linda leaned into her father's photo, smiling big, cameras flashing. It was supposed to be Mary beside her, but Mary was edited out of her own life. The final insult came like a whisper. One of Linda's friends, a girl Mary had once driven to school years ago, laughed while scrolling on her phone. "Look, Linda, this shot is gorgeous. It's like a magazine spread. No distractions in the background." She tilted the screen, showing Linda radiant, her father beside her, a picture-perfect frame. Mary realized she was the distraction removed. Mary excused herself quietly and slipped outside to the patio. The night air was cool, the sounds of laughter muffled behind the glass doors. She leaned against the stone railing, staring at the manicured lawn. Her blouse felt suddenly too tight, her shoes pinched. For the first time, she wished she had never come. Humiliation doesn't always come as a slap. Sometimes it comes as 100 tiny cuts, each one so small you tell yourself you can endure it. But together, they bleed you dry. Mary stood there in the dark, holding back sobs she wouldn't allow the cameras to catch. She wasn't going to give them more footage, more drama, more content to edit. She kept her pain private, locked behind closed lips. When the evening ended, she slipped out before the crowd. No hugs, no photos, no good nights, just her shoes clicking on the pavement, echoing in the night. She drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. At home, she laid the torn dress across her bed, her fingers brushing the frayed edges. She could still hear Linda's words, cheap, ruining the shot, burning in her ears. And now the dinner, the seat at the back, the absence of her name. It was as if the life she had built for Linda was being rewritten without her, as though she were a stranger who had never mattered. She whispered into the empty room, "You were my world, and now I'm nothing in yours." The sound of her own voice startled her. It was raw, breaking, foreign. She pressed her palm to her chest, willing herself to be still. But deep inside, beneath the humiliation, something else stirred. A flicker she hadn't felt before. It wasn't anger, not yet. It wasn't revenge either. It was the faintest spark of realization that silence had cost her everything. And that spark, however small, would not stay hidden forever. For now, though, Mary turned off the light, crawled into bed, and wrapped her arms around the torn dress like it was the only piece of herself she had left. She closed her eyes, tears soaking the fabric, while the world outside moved on without her. The humiliation was complete, and in the silence, the wound deepened. The church was alive with flowers the morning of the photo shoot, every corner decorated with ivory roses and eucalyptus leaves. The air smelled sweet, heavy with perfume and polish. For once, Mary felt a flicker of anticipation. After the humiliation of the rehearsal dinner, she was desperate for a moment, just one, to stand beside her daughter and be seen not as a burden, but as a mother. She had been told to arrive early. Hannah had said, almost offhandedly, "We'll get some family shots before the bridal party arrives." Family shots. The words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Mary ironed her blouse twice, brushed her hair until it lay smooth against her shoulders, and carried herself with quiet dignity as she walked up the steps of St. Augustine. Inside, the photographer waved her over. "Perfect, Mary. We'll have you stand here for now," he said, pointing to a spot near the altar. Mary's heart leapt. She thought, "Finally, they remember I belong here." She clasped her hands together to stop them from trembling. Linda swept in moments later, glowing in her gown, every detail styled to perfection. Cameras whirred as she posed with Ethan, then with her bridesmaids, then with her father. Each frame captured smiles, laughter, joy. Mary stood nearby, waiting for her turn, her chest swelling with a fragile pride. At last, the photographer called out, "All right, let's get Mom in here." Mary felt her breath hitch. She smoothed the front of her blouse, blinked away sudden tears, and stepped forward. This was the moment. The photograph that would hang in frames, the proof she existed in her daughter's story. She moved closer, her smile trembling, her heart whispering thank you to God for letting her stand beside her child. The photographer lifted his camera, tilting his head. Hold still, perfect. Mary felt the warmth of Linda's dress brush against her arm, the nearness of family at last. But then, like a needle scratching across a record, Hannah's voice cut in. "Wait, sorry, this isn't working. The colors don't balance. The look is too off-brand." She frowned, tapping her tablet. "Let's just do bride and dad here. We'll slot Mom into something else later." Mary froze, the floor tilting beneath her. "But..." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Linda glanced at her, quick, apologetic but firm. "Mom, it's just for the layout. We'll take some with you after. Please, don't make it a thing." Her voice was soft but final. The photographer lowered his camera. "Sorry, Mary, step aside just for now." Mary felt the sting of heat rise to her cheeks. The bridesmaids shifted. The groomsmen cleared their throats. The silence pressed down like a weight, heavier than any fabric she had ever sewn. She backed away slowly, folding her hands tight against her stomach to keep them from shaking. From the corner, she watched as her daughter leaned into her father's embrace, the flash capturing a picture-perfect moment. The crowd clapped, the cameras clicked. The family photo that would be printed, framed, posted to social media, the family photo, no longer had her in it. She whispered under her breath, "I'm still here. I'm still your mother." But no one heard. Afterward, as people shuffled and laughed, one of the bridesmaids approached Mary. "Don't worry," she said with a practiced smile. "They'll get plenty with you later. These are just the ones that really matter." The words struck deeper than she knew. The ones that really matter, as if Mary's existence, her decades of sacrifice, were nothing but a placeholder in her own daughter's life. Mary sat down in a pew, the wood hard beneath her. She looked at the stained glass above, sunlight spilling colors across the floor. Once she had dreamed of seeing Linda walk down this aisle with pride, of being the mother whose love was written into every step. Now she realized she was nothing more than a shadow at the edge of the frame, someone edited in and out depending on the mood board. For a brief, painful moment, she had believed she belonged. That fragile spark of recognition had warmed her chest like a candle in a cold room. But in an instant, it was snuffed out, leaving her in the dark again. That was the cruelty of it. Not being left out from the start, but being invited in just long enough to feel hope before being pushed away. That night, Back at home, Mary sat at her sewing table with the torn dress across her lap. Her fingers traced the frayed edges. She thought about how close she had come to being part of Linda's story, how easily it had been undone. Her hands moved automatically, threading a needle. She began to stitch, not to repair the dress, but to keep her heart from unraveling completely. Each pull of the thread was a silent prayer. See me. Remember me. Don't erase me. But deep down, she knew prayers weren't always answered. Sometimes the people you loved most wrote you out of the story on purpose. And so Mary sewed in silence, holding herself together with nothing but thread and stubbornness, even as her daughter's perfect wedding marched forward without her. Mary used to be the one who knew every detail. When Linda was a child, it was Mary who organized the birthday parties, who remembered to pack the extra snacks on field trips, who double-checked the school calendar to be sure her daughter never missed a thing. But now, in the middle of her own daughter's wedding season, she was the one who knew nothing at all. The group chat pinged with constant notifications. Family wedding core, the place where every plan was shared, every adjustment made. At first, Mary tried to keep up, scrolling through color-coded charts and links she didn't quite understand. She typed messages carefully, asking gentle questions. Do you need me to pick up flowers? Should I bake something for the brunch? Her words sank into silence. No replies. Then one day, she opened the app and found herself locked out. The thread had been renamed, and she was no longer part of it. She called Linda, voice soft, trying to hide her worry. Sweetheart, I think my phone glitched. I can't see the wedding chat anymore. There was a pause, the kind that stretches into forever. Then Linda said, Oh, Mom. We just thought it might be easier for you not to be bombarded with details. It's a lot to manage. Don't take it the wrong way. Mary's chest tightened. She whispered, Of course. Thank you for thinking of me. But when the call ended, the house was so quiet she could hear the clock ticking in the hall, every second marking the distance growing between them. The next week, Mary stopped by Ethan and Linda's apartment to drop off a small box of embroidered napkins she had been working on. She'd stitched their initials into each one, hoping they might be used at the rehearsal dinner. But when she arrived, the doorman politely told her she wasn't on the guest list for the gathering upstairs. She stood there, clutching the box, feeling the eyes of strangers glance her way. In the end, she left the napkins at the desk with a note, For the bride and groom, with love. Later, she checked Linda's social media, something she rarely did before. Photo after photo appeared, bridesmaids shopping, Ethan's family hosting brunch, rehearsal parties lit with candles and laughter. In every shot, people smiled with arms around each other. Mary wasn't in a single frame. It was as if she didn't exist. That's the cruel thing about being erased. It doesn't happen with a shout. It happens quietly, with the click of a button, the stroke of a pen, the edit of a photo. One moment, you're part of the story, and the next, you're gone, replaced by someone else, or by nothing at all. Mary sat on her porch one evening, the box of scraps beside her, listening to crickets hum in the tall grass. She wondered if she was overreacting, if maybe this was just how things worked now. Maybe mothers didn't belong in the center once their children grew up. Maybe she was meant to fade out of focus. She wrapped her cardigan tighter and whispered, But why does it feel like I've been erased? And here's where I pause to ask you, if you saw your name disappear from your own family's story, if the people you loved most forgot to include you in their milestones, would you stay silent like Mary, or would you speak? Share it below, because someone might be living this very moment and need to know they're not alone. The next blow came with the seating chart. Mary drove across town to drop off fabric swatches Linda had asked for months ago, and while she waited in the kitchen, Hannah's clipboard lay on the counter. Mary's eyes fell on the chart, tables of names neatly written in elegant script. She scanned down, searching for her own. Her heart lurched when she found it, at a table far from the head, tucked behind the DJ booth, the place where sound drowned out conversation, where no camera would ever pan. A faint note beside her name read, "Seat filler if needed." Her throat closed. She placed the clipboard back exactly as she found it, smoothing the page with trembling fingers. In that moment, Mary realized she wasn't even considered a guest of honor. She was a placeholder, someone to fill empty space if another body wasn't available. That night, she stood before her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman in the glass looked tired, her eyes shadowed, her shoulders curved inward as if bracing against an invisible storm. "When did I become optional?" she whispered. The isolation was complete. No group chats, no invitations, no seat at the table worth remembering. She was no longer part of Linda's world, not even on paper. Mary went to bed early, clutching the torn dress she hadn't yet repaired, pulling it over her body like armor. She told herself she didn't need recognition, that she could survive without it. But deep inside, a voice echoed, louder than the silence around her. Love shouldn't erase you. It started with a photograph. Mary logged onto her daughter's social media one morning, just to feel close. The page glittered with new posts from the wedding preparations. Linda and Ethan laughing in front of a flower wall, bridesmaids clinking glasses at a rooftop brunch, Ethan's mother adjusting Linda's veil. Every picture was saturated with joy, curated like a magazine spread. But when Mary scrolled far enough back, her breath caught. An old family photo was gone, the one from Linda's high school graduation. It had been a favorite of Mary's, the two of them standing on the front lawn, Linda in her cap and gown, Mary's hand on her shoulder, pride shining brighter than the sun. Now it was missing. Quietly deleted, replaced by a new portrait of Linda, alone in a sleek studio shot. No explanation, no reason, just erased. She sat there, staring at the empty space where her memory used to live. It wasn't just a photo, it was proof that she had been part of her daughter's story, and now that proof had been wiped clean. Later that week, Mary sent Linda a small box filled with mementos she had kept for decades. A pressed daisy from Linda's kindergarten play, a crayon drawing of their old house, the ribbon from her first dance recital. She thought her daughter might want to use them in a memory display at the reception. Days passed with no reply. Finally, the box appeared back on Mary's porch, returned unopened, a sticky note attached. Not aesthetic. Thanks anyway. Mary carried the box inside, her hands trembling. She set it on the table, opened the lid, and stared at the pieces of a life she had once believed sacred. The daisy crumbled at her touch, brittle with age. The ribbon's red had faded to pale pink. She pressed the drawing to her chest and whispered, "You were my world." Tears blurred the lines, smearing the colors. At church the following Sunday, she overheard Ethan's aunt gushing to friends about the slideshow being prepared for the reception. They've curated it so beautifully, baby photos, teen years, all the way up to now, so modern, so clean. Mary smiled politely, her heart secretly lifting. Surely, she thought, she would be in some of those pictures. After all, she'd been there for every milestone. But when the preview was shown, her heart sank. Photo after photo lit up the screen. Linda's childhood birthdays, prom night, college graduation, and yet in every frame where Mary had once stood, she was cropped out, blurred, or simply missing. Even the picture from that snowy Christmas when she pawned her ring to keep the lights on. Mary remembered standing behind Linda, smiling in her worn sweater. But on the screen, it was just Linda and the tree. Mary was invisible. It was as if someone had gone back through time and edited her out of her own life. The losses piled quietly. The embroidered quilt Mary had made from scraps of Linda's childhood clothes disappeared from the guest bedroom, replaced by a sleek duvet that matched the wedding's color palette. The silver locket Mary had given her daughter on her 16th birthday was no longer around Linda's neck. Instead, A new diamond pendant, a gift from Ethan's family, sparkled in its place. Each absence was a wound that no one else noticed, because to everyone else those pieces had never mattered. But to Mary, they were her heart stitched into fabric, her love etched into metal, her life preserved in small tokens. And now they were gone. She told herself she shouldn't be surprised. Sacrifice rarely leaves evidence. A mother's love is often invisible by design, meant to support, not to shine. But knowing that didn't ease the ache of watching her existence quietly erased. One evening, she sat in her sewing room with the returned box open before her. She lifted the crayon drawing, the daisy petals, the faded ribbon. Around her, the hum of the outside world carried on. Cars passing, dogs barking, neighbors laughing on porches. Inside, it was silent, but for her breath. She began to sew again, not with new fabric, but with the scraps Linda had discarded. She stitched them together into something rough, uneven, a patchwork of memory and grief. Each stitch was like a heartbeat. I was there. I mattered. Don't forget me. But the world outside didn't hear. That night, she dreamed of being in a crowded room where everyone was laughing and clinking glasses. She tried to wave, to call out, but no one turned. She moved closer, but each time she reached someone, her hand passed through them like smoke. She woke with her heart pounding, sweat on her forehead, whispering into the darkness, "Am I already gone?" Unseen loss is the cruelest kind. No one mourns with you, because no one else notices what's missing. Only you carry the weight of it, a private funeral for pieces of yourself that vanish one by one. Mary folded the patchwork cloth across her lap, pressing her palm to the uneven seams. She felt both proud and broken. This was the proof that she existed, even if no one else cared to see. And yet, even in her despair, a part of her held on. She thought, if no one else remembers, then I must remember for myself. It was a fragile resolve, but it was something to cling to in the silence. The unseen losses had stripped her of photographs, keepsakes, even her place in her daughter's memories. But they had not stripped her of her truth. And though no one else seemed to notice her absence, she knew, deep in her bones, that erasure could never be complete, not while she was still here. The reception hall rehearsal was buzzing with noise, laughter, the shuffle of chairs, clinking glasses. The event team wanted to stage a mini run of the big night for sponsors and vendors, complete with lights, cameras, and a live stream for those who couldn't be there. For Mary, it was another chance to simply watch from the sidelines. She told herself she could handle it, that she had learned to survive the quiet exclusions. But she didn't yet know how brutal it would be to have her erasure made public. She arrived early carrying a plate of lemon bars. It was a small gesture, something she had always done for Linda's milestones. Food was her way of saying, "I'm proud of you." She set the plate on the dessert table, smoothing the foil back carefully. For a moment, she let herself feel useful. When the music started, the cameras turned. Linda and Ethan walked in, hand in hand, faces glowing under the lights. Guests applauded, voices rising in cheers. Mary clapped softly from the back corner, heart full despite everything. She was content to watch, to let her daughter shine. But then during a lull in the program, a microphone squealed, and Linda's voice rang out. "Can we keep the energy up, everyone? No downers, no drama. Please, let's not let anyone ruin the mood tonight." Her eyes swept the room, and for a fleeting second, they landed on Mary. A small laugh rippled through the crowd, a chuckle that spread like static. Mary froze. The implication was clear, subtle enough to pass as a joke, sharp enough to pierce her heart. She shrank into her seat, heat flooding her cheeks. People turned back to the stage, but the damage was done. She felt herself branded as the problem, the one who spoiled things simply by existing. Later, when it was time for family acknowledgments, Linda raised her glass. "I couldn't have done this without Ethan, without his incredible family, without our amazing team who brought this vision to life." She listed vendors, bridesmaids, friends, but not once did she mention her mother. Not once. Mary's stomach twisted, but she stayed quiet. She thought of all the nights she had stayed up sewing costumes, of the meals she had skipped so Linda could eat, of the bills she had juggled to keep the lights on. And now, in front of everyone, her lifetime of sacrifice had been erased in a single toast. Then came the cruelest blow. During a mock photo session, a staff member asked Mary to step forward. Relief surged through her. It felt like a chance to belong again. She walked toward the group, shoulders straight, hope fragile but alive. But before she reached them, Hannah tapped her arm. "Sorry, Mary, not this one. We want a cleaner frame. Could you stand just over there?" She pointed to a space near the wall, out of sight of the main camera. Mary stopped mid-step. The guests shuffled, the photographer refocused, the moment moved on without her. She stood there, stranded, while laughter and flashbulbs filled the room. She didn't even bother to hide her tears this time. They slid hot down her cheeks as she held herself still, invisible and exposed at the same time. Humiliation is sharper in public. Alone, you can swallow pain, tell yourself you imagined it. But in a room full of people, the silence after an insult grows louder, the absence of your name more final, the sting of laughter more searing. Mary felt herself unraveling with every passing second. She gathered her things quietly, clutching her purse against her chest, and slipped out before the rehearsal ended. No one stopped her. No one noticed she was gone. Outside, the night air wrapped around her like a shroud. She walked to her car, shoes tapping against the pavement, and leaned hard against the door before climbing in. Her hands shook on the steering wheel as she whispered, "I can't do this anymore." Her voice cracked, a sound torn from deep inside, raw and broken. Driving home, she replayed the words, the laughter, the look in her daughter's eyes. Each memory cut deeper until she was gripping the wheel so tightly her fingers ached. She parked in her driveway and sat in the dark, unable to move, staring at the empty house. When she finally went inside, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat at her sewing machine, the torn dress still draped across it, and stared at the frayed fabric. Her hands hovered over it, trembling. For the first time, she didn't feel like sewing would fix anything. This wasn't a hem or a seam she could mend. This was her life unraveling. She pressed her forehead to the table and sobbed, the sound echoing in the small room. All the strength she had built, all the quiet dignity she had carried, cracked, wide open. She had reached the end of silence. She had reached the breaking point. For decades, she had told herself love was enough, that sacrifice spoke louder than words, that one day she would be seen. But tonight she realized she had given everything, and in return, she had been erased. Mary lifted her head, eyes red, face streaked with tears. In the quiet, she whispered, "I'm done waiting." The words were soft, but they carried weight, heavier than any vow she had ever spoken. Her breaking point had come, and though she didn't yet know it, the shattering would make room for something else, a truth that could no longer be denied, a resolve that would carry her forward. Mary woke the next morning with swollen eyes, her body heavy from the night before. The memory of the laughter, the microphone, the looks, it all came rushing back, raw and unrelenting. She sat at her sewing machine, hands resting on the frayed edge of the dress, unable to pick up the needle. For the first time, the thought entered her mind, maybe I've been waiting for recognition that will never come. Later that day, she walked downtown to clear her head. The streets were alive with people, couples laughing over coffee, children running with balloons, vendors calling out their specials. Mary felt like a ghost drifting through the noise. She ended up at a small cafe near the church, slipping into a corner seat with a cup of tea she barely tasted. Across the room, she noticed Sophie, the young intern who had been filming at the wedding events. The girl carried her camera bag slung across her shoulder, eyes tired but kind. When she spotted Mary, she walked over and sat down without hesitation. "I saw what happened last night," Sophie said quietly. "I wish I could tell you it didn't matter, but it did." Mary tried to smile. "I guess I'm just..." not part of the story anymore. Sophie leaned closer. That's not true. You are the story. You've given everything, and they treat you like you're invisible. But I need you to know, it's not you who's small. It's them who can't see. The words settled deep inside Mary, heavier than any insult. She blinked back tears, realizing for the first time that the problem wasn't her lack of worth. The problem was that she had been giving it all to people who refused to value it. For decades, she had begged silently for acknowledgement, waiting for her sacrifices to be recognized. But now, in this moment, she understood. Recognition from others was never guaranteed, and if she kept waiting for it, she would disappear completely. Mary placed her hands around the warm teacup, steadying herself. I think I've been asking the wrong person to see me, she whispered. Sophie nodded gently. Maybe it's time you see yourself. Mary let out a shaky breath, a mixture of grief and relief. The shift was quiet but profound. She wasn't angry, not yet, but she was done begging. She was done letting her worth depend on someone else's approval. And here's where I want to pause and ask you, have you ever realized, maybe too late, that the people you were fighting to please never truly saw you? If you have, what did you do? Did you keep trying? Or did you finally decide to see yourself first, share it below, because someone else might need your story today? Mary walked home slower than usual, but lighter somehow. The dress was still torn, the invitation still excluded her, the world still blind to her sacrifices. But inside, something had shifted. She no longer felt like a woman begging for scraps of acknowledgement. She felt like someone who could, perhaps for the first time, choose herself. The moment of realization had come, and though it wouldn't erase the pain, it gave her the first thread of strength she would need to begin again. Mary didn't announce it to anyone. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices, no declarations of anger. Her decision came the way rain begins, quiet at first, a steady drop that builds until the whole earth is wet. That evening, she stood in her bedroom, staring at the closet where she'd kept boxes of old photographs, folded quilts, and mementos of Linda's life. For years, she had guarded them like treasures, believing they were proof that her love mattered. Now, she looked at them with new eyes. They weren't proof for anyone else. They were simply pieces of herself, and she no longer wanted to keep them in a house where their meaning had been denied. Mary pulled out a small suitcase, the same one she had once packed for family road trips. She placed a few clothes inside, then carefully chose what to bring. The sewing scissors her mother had passed down, the patchwork cloth she'd been stitching from scraps, and a notebook where she had begun writing letters to herself. She left behind the rest. As she moved around the room, her heart ached, but it was no longer the desperate ache of someone begging to be seen. It was the bittersweet ache of someone closing a chapter. She paused at the doorway, looking back at the walls filled with shadows of the life she had built. "You don't own me anymore," she whispered. The words weren't bitter. They were steady, a vow to herself. She walked to the porch and sat for a while, listening to the night settle in. Crickets sang, a breeze rustled the trees, and for the first time in months she felt calm. Tomorrow she would call the landlord of the small apartment she'd seen near the park. Tomorrow she would begin a life not built around waiting for recognition that would never come. Mary knew Linda and Ethan wouldn't notice her absence right away. Their days were full of schedules and content shoots, eyes fixed on the perfect image. Maybe they would only realize later, in a moment when they looked around and saw a missing chair, an unopened gift, or a silence that couldn't be filled. By then, Mary wouldn't be there to explain, and she didn't need to. For decades, she had lived as if her worth depended on someone else's approval. But that night, She decided quietly, firmly, that her life was her own. No audience, no applause, no spotlight was necessary. The choice was simple. She would no longer wait to be invited in. She would walk away on her own terms. The suitcase waited by the door, small but heavy with meaning. Mary touched the handle, her lips curved in the faintest smile. For the first time in years, she felt light enough to breathe. The silent decision had been made, and with it, Mary began to reclaim herself. Mary's new apartment was nothing grand, just a one-bedroom walk-up near the park. The walls were bare, the carpet thin, and the kitchen sink dripped a little when she turned it off. But to her, it felt like fresh air. It was hers. No cameras, no curated palettes, no one deciding if she belonged in the picture. The first morning, she brewed coffee in a chipped mug she'd brought from home, then opened the window to let the breeze carry in the sound of children playing in the park. For the first time in months, she smiled without forcing it. It wasn't joy exactly. It was peace. The soft kind that seeps in slowly. Mary pulled her sewing machine onto the small table by the window. She didn't reach for the torn dress this time. Instead, she unfolded the patchwork she had been stitching from discarded scraps. Fabric too off-brand for the wedding, pieces once rejected. She ran her fingers along the seams and felt a quiet pride. These scraps weren't mistakes. They were proof of persistence, fragments of love stitched together into something whole again. That afternoon, she wandered into a second-hand shop on Main Street. A faded piano sat in the corner, keys yellowed with age. Mary pressed one gently, the note trembling but alive. She remembered the music lessons she'd abandoned decades ago, when bills had to be paid and Linda needed new shoes. For years, she had silenced that part of herself. Now, standing in the dusty light, she felt a spark. She paid the shopkeeper a few dollars to have it delivered to her apartment. At night, Mary lit a single candle and wrote in her notebook. Not letters to Linda, not lists of what she had done for others, but words for herself. She wrote about the girl she once was, about the woman she had become, about the mother who had given everything. She wrote promises, not to wait anymore, not to beg anymore, not to disappear into someone else's shadow. No one else knew about this rebirth. There were no announcements, no speeches. On social media, Linda's wedding countdown continued with glossy photos and perfect captions. Mary didn't check anymore. She had her own life to notice. When neighbors passed by her open window, they sometimes heard the uneven notes of the old piano or the hum of her sewing machine. A few smiled, pausing to listen. But Mary wasn't performing for them. She wasn't performing for anyone. She was simply living, piece by piece, note by note, rediscovering the parts of herself she had buried. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and deeply her own. The rebirth had begun, not for recognition, not for applause, but because she had finally chosen herself. The wedding day came and went without Mary. She didn't wait for an invitation that never arrived. Instead, she dressed herself in the patched gown she had mended with red thread, each stitch visible like scars turned into art. She walked slowly to St. Augustine, not to sit inside, but to stand at a distance as the bells tolled. From the far side of the courtyard, she saw the cars pulling up, the cameras flashing, the carefully curated spectacle unfolding. People rushed past her without a second glance. She wasn't part of their story anymore, and that was fine. For the first time, it didn't break her. It freed her. After a few minutes, Mary turned away. She carried with her a small bundle, the patchwork cloth she had sewn from scraps, and one photograph she hadn't been able to part with. Linda, at 6 years old, smiling with missing teeth, clutching the quilt Mary had made for her. She walked down to the riverbank where the water moved steady and sure, carrying everything it touched forward. There, she lit a single match and held the flame to the edge of the cloth. The fabric caught slowly, curling into ash. She whispered, "I gave you everything, and now I give myself back to me." When the flame grew steady, she placed the bundle in the water, watching as the river carried it away. Mary didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She felt light, as though laying down a weight she had carried for decades. The river didn't ask her why she was letting go. It didn't judge. It simply received and moved on. She walked home with her head high, sunlight warming her shoulders. In her small apartment, the piano waited, the sewing machine waited, the notebook with her own words waited. She smiled at the sight of them. This was her life now, no longer an afterthought, no longer erased. It was hers, wholly hers. That night, she wrote her final words in the notebook. I don't need anyone else to recognize me. I recognize myself. She signed her name and closed the book. Mary's closure wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a scene crafted for cameras. It was quiet, steady, and real. She had chosen freedom, not revenge. And in that choice, she found a dignity stronger than any apology her daughter might one day offer. And now I want to ask you, have you ever had to let go of something or someone in order to find yourself again? If you have, share your story below. You never know who might be reading, who might need to hear that healing is possible, even in silence.